FX Radio and I'm Andrew Whitfield-Cook. And with me on the line today is a researcher of great renown and a career spanning a few decades, and that's Hub Regtop. So welcome, Hub.
Thank you, Andrew.
Hub, you've done a lot of ingredient research. You've been a researcher for many years. Tell me about your history. How did you get into it? Where did you start?
I started in 1961 when I got a cadetship to work as CSIRO in animal endocrinology. Mm-hmm. So doing a part-time university course at that time took 7 years. So in 1973 I graduated with a major in microbiology and biochemistry. And I was working at that time also at Prince of Wales Hospital, where I did a lot of research with Fred Hollows. I worked with Fred Hollows for 5 years on diabetic retinopathy. Yeah. And basically microvascular problems with diabetics. And after that 5 years, I ran a pathology laboratory working directly with diabetics, mainly type 2 diabetics, and looking at vascular disease in diabetics or diabetes. Then also at the same time, I started off my own veterinary company in 1983, looking at researching nutrients in animal welfare and also good nutrition and problems that all animals have in a sense of intense farming, where they have problems in fact that the body is growing faster than the legs, and the legs are having problems both in chickens, turkeys, and pigs. Yeah. So at that time, a friend of mine who was running Biogland called Ernie Keegan, he was the managing director of Biogland, and he asked me, with my research background, because I was working with fatty acids at the time, to do some lecturing. And that started the whole education process, educating doctors and pharmacists on basically real research and real scientific data. So we started education courses, educating practitioners, doctors and pharmacists. All my time I spent basically educating and talking about the different aspects of research and what has been found in the scientific literature, right up to date, rather than the concept of people saying, well, this has been done, and we know everything there is to know about this and that. The example was that at that time we had herbs in Australia, and the herbs at that time weren't very well defined. It was a bit like going lawn mowing on the weekend and getting grass and drying it and then crushing it up and saying this is A and B and C and D. Yeah. And we discovered a company called Indena, which Ernie and I were very interested in, and they had what they classified as standardised herbs. And a lot of people in Australia hadn't heard of them, so we got all the data together. We got the people from Indena, which was a semi-pharmaceutical company, come over and actually show us what they had. And this was the first time that sort of the concept of standardisation came to Australia, which Ernie Keegan and myself introduced with Roger Wells at the time from Health Minders. And I think at that time we were basically kicked out of every institution because no one wanted to hear about standardised herbs. They all thought they were isolates and it didn't fit the pattern of a herbal extract and all those sort of things. And eventually, Roger Wells gave us the okay to start the ball rolling. And that came into a few products. And then you look at the industry today. So
can I ask you, where did the link come? When did you meet Michael Hall and Sean and Alex Hall, who at that time owned Bioceuticals?
At the same time that Ernie Keegan rang me up because I was involved with the micelle formulations. Yeah. And what the micelles were. And then Ernie asked me to come in, and also Michael Hall asked me to come in and start lecturing. So we lectured extensively on Biogland products, and that started the ball rolling basically. So that's now 25, 30 years ago. So I also then started to become on a commercial side where I was very interested in fish oil, and I was instrumental in getting a big government grant for Clover Pharmaceuticals, which came on the stock exchange, and is Clover Pharmaceuticals now in Melbourne, which produces fish oil.
So they're one of the only Australian fish oil marketers, aren't they?
They are, That's right. So from a broad point of view of just about, and by the way, my vet company is still going since 1983. We've done a lot of work now on animals. Mainly the big issues, which I keep saying, is nutrition to animals, which is no different looking nutrition at humans. And there's a lot of misnomers. There's a lot of furphies out there. I mean, if you look at our nutrition for a start, the agricultural revolution changed our complete diet habits. The example would be if you had a cow and you let it eat grass, or a calf, and you let it go to its full weight over 2 or 3 years, you'll find that the omega-3 concentration in most animals are actually around about 6 to 9%. But because we feed them differently altogether to get them to body weight to market in about a year, we don't have any omega-3 left in the cows we eat. So we've lost, because we're economically driven to get our money back quickly. We're not looking at the nutrients which are required for maybe our long-term health.
You've done a lot of work with nutraceuticals in animals. If we can talk about one of particular interest at the moment, and I think the reason is because it's only just been made available to the Australian market, and that's vitamin K2. But
right.
You've been doing research on this for years. I remember you speaking at in 2008 about this. So it's that's a lag time of 8 years before humans can actually take it as a supplement. So tell me more about the research on vitamin K2, because I think this is really interesting with regards to what you were saying previously with these osteochondroitin issues.
The history of vitamin K, I think, is important to start off with. There was actually a Danish scientist, Henrik Dam, who got the Nobel Prize for his work in feeding animals very low quality feed, and he noticed that they always started hemorrhaging. And then when he gave them green things like spinach and other vegetable things, then he noticed that the hemorrhage stopped. So that's when the concept of vitamin K being involved with clotting was first discovered, and they got the Nobel Prize in 1943. And since then, the thing that people still think of, and this is the regulators as well as the medical profession and everybody else, is the fact that vitamin K is only involved with clotting. And we had that issue with the regulation authorities in APVMA, which is like the TGA, but it's the animal side of it. And we've done a lot of work since, and so has the rest of the world. If you look at the scientific data now, see, the only protein that we were looking at that particular time was clotting, which is prothrombin, which goes to thrombin, and that causes coagulation. Now, the prothrombin has to be carboxylated by vitamin K to become thrombin and causes clotting. Now, this causes the concept that everybody thinks if you have more vitamin K, therefore you clot to death, which is a misnomer.
Not the case.
You can feed a human on the toxicology studies that we've done on animals. You can feed a human 2.5 kilos of vitamin K, one pure, and not have any end result. Right? See, once you've reached the maximization of prothrombin conversion to thrombin, activate the enzyme, you can't activate it anymore. And to give you an example, you only need 50 micrograms to activate prothrombin to activate your clotting system so you don't bleed to death. Right? But since then, they've found 14 more proteins which have to be carboxylated by vitamin K. Now, all these different proteins have different roles. At the moment, obviously, a lot of people know that osteocalcin, which is the protein which has to be carboxylated to put calcium in your bone. And unless it's carboxylated, you cannot put the calcium into your bone.
And this is when we're getting into the differences between vitamin K1 and then the longer chains of K2.
Yes, and we'll come to that in a second, because I think it's important to understand that the difficulty still is that if you're a herbivore right? And vitamin K basically is in all the green chloroplast that you have looking around the garden. All the green things can have K1, phytoquinone, because it's got to do with the electron transport system in the plant for its survival to produce photosynthesis. Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing is that the other dietary thing which from humans, we have fermented products. So our intake is phytoquinone from the green things we eat, and also we have aminoquinone, which we're coming to, which is K2, which comes in our diet from fermentation and fermented products, like, say, for instance, blue vein cheeses and eggs have got K2 in it, milk's got K2 in it, all those sort of things. So our diet now has a small concentration of K2 in natural food. Now, the thing about K2 is that from a commercial point of view, there are quite a few different players in the world. The Japanese started the whole ball rolling by saying, well, the northern part of Japan, people eating natto, which is the traditional diet, which is a fermented soybean. Those people had less postmenopausal osteoporosis than the southern part of Japan. So that link came, and so obviously the K2 from natto was exploited and sold to the rest of the world, and I think there's a company called Natto Pharma, which has a fermented product of K2 from natto, and also you have both Norwegian companies. You have another Norwegian company called Kappa Biosciences, which have made a synthetic vitamin K7. So when you say K2, the only main things in our diet is MK4, which is generally in meat coming from K1, metabolized in the tissues to MK4, and we have MK7 now introduced by natto and other companies as well.
And the difference in the MK7 and the MK4 is basically the molecular length, is that right? The 7 is longer than the 4?
The MK4 has 4 isopenoid units, and you have the 7 isopenoid linkages on the naphthaquinone. If it's MK7, and if you have 4, then it's called MK4. So the MK7 is interesting because of its history for a start, and also now you have a couple of companies. One is, as I said, is the Natto Pharma, which has got the fermented product, and you have the product which is now also made synthetically, and that's a debate at the moment which hasn't been resolved. And so-called synthetic one, I think, has been just recently accepted by the TGA, and which is the Kappa Biosciences, has now been accepted by the TGA, but used in, I think, to 180 micrograms intake. Things are changing in Australia while overseas it's been used for many, many years.
Yeah, I think
a lot of studies have been done in Holland at the moment by Kees Vermeer from Utrecht University on K2 and its role in osteoporosis and postmenopausal osteoporosis and the treatment of. So that's sort of the background of the vitamin K story. Now, our calcium intake has increased because the concept is that we hope that calcium will go to your bone strength and your bone, particularly in postmenopausal women. But the interesting thing is there's a good correlation between calcium intake and calcification of your arteries.
Yep.
And what has been noticed at the moment is the fact that the calcification of your arteries, see, the calcium intake, the body has to say, okay, I need that for bone, and I'll take that calcium to put down into the bone as much as I need. Now, what I'm going to do with the rest of the calcium? And the body says, well, I don't know what to do with it, so I'll put it in the arteries. Now, the regulation of that is really by another protein. There's another protein in your intracellular tissues of the arteries, which actually says it was carboxylated. You've got to remember, all these things are only actively carboxylated to become active. And really what that is saying, don't put it in the arteries, get rid of it. So that's what the vitamin K does do. Now, whether the debate is whether it's vitamin K1, whether vitamin K2 does a better job. Vitamin K2 has got a longer side chain, more lipophilic, and therefore will probably stay in your system longer than vitamin K1. So at the moment, the jury's out all around. We do have that matrix protein, MGP, which says take the calcium out of the tissues. We don't want it there, you just want it in bone. We don't want hardening of the arteries. So also there is another protein called GAS6, which is growth arrest specific protein. Yep. That's also in your vasculature. And what they've discovered is recently, GAS6 is one of the 14 proteins now nominated to be carboxylated and necessary to be carboxylated by vitamin K. And that organises your immune system, your innate immune system. So phagocytosis has to be linked, the microorganism, to the macrophage. It is linked by GAS6. So you can now understand where the vitamin K story is going. It's going into an area where it's got to do with the immune system. So these are all new things that have been developed over the last 4 or 5 years.
So with regards to vitamin K2, and you've got the MK7 and the MK4, I think one of the reasons that the TGA has accepted the listing of MK7 but not from NATO is that it can sort of guarantee a dose of MK7. Is that correct?
See, the thing about the TGA, about the fermented material, is that they're not sure what other things are there.
Yeah.
Right? It comes from soy. Is it allergenic? What other things are being produced during that fermentation?
Yeah.
Well, if you make something synthetic, then you're making it from chemical molecules, which is chemistry.
I think the thing that practitioners sometimes get a little bit, I won't be as strong as to say paranoid, but let's say concerned about, is when they hear the word synthesized, they think it means automatically alien, whereas synthesized really just means controlled. B vitamins are controlled, fermented from bacteria and yeasts.
That's right.
And that's why we have them in our multivitamins. They're synthesized. We synthesize things.
Because it's synthesized, we're talking about biological activity. Now, you can probably eat quite a bit of NATO material, and maybe 20, 30, 40% is not being active. In fact, if you think about fatty acids, cis and trans fatty acids, how much noise has that been made in the sense of trans fatty acids completely going against the cis, which is the natural form? In fact, trans fatty acids inhibit all the enzymic processes that cis fatty acids mobilize for our prostaglandins and all the other compounds that fatty acids synthesize in our body. The trans doesn't do that.
So with regards to fatty acids, the trans is bad, but with regards to many herbal extracts and other sort of, vitamins and things like that, the trans is the active, yeah,
like vitamin E, like vitamin K. All the trans systems are fine.
And so with regards to vitamin K, MK7, K2, MK7, you've got three sort of broad areas of action with regards to bone, the immune system and the vascular system. Can you talk a little bit about what sort of conditions the MK7 treats and how it works in those conditions?
It's basically what I said in that you've got the protein circulating in your body. Right? One would, as I said, is the matrix protein. Right? Now, if it's not activated, it will induce calcium deposition in your arteries. So that's where vitamin K comes into. And I think this is the point. You've got 14 to 15 proteins in your body all wanting to be carboxylated. You want not to bleed to death. So from an evolutionary point of view, the prothrombin thing has such low levels required for activation.
Yep.
That's the first thing that's activated.
For survival, yeah.
Yeah. So there's good evidence if you want osteocalcin to be fully activated, you need nearly 1 milligram of vitamin K. Now, I think that's the difference. You might need 50 micrograms to activate prothrombin, but you definitely need something around between 500 to a milligram, 500 micrograms to a milligram of vitamin K as a supplement to fully carboxylate osteocalcin. Now, we haven't fully established the immune system, what is fully required for carboxylation of GAS6. All this research is ongoing at the moment, so there's a lot of questions. I think the outstanding thing is the toxicity of clotting and worrying about clotting to death in the sense of an high intake of K1 or K2 is not there.
I might just add a little caveat in there, and that is that you can't clot to death. But when people might be on a blood thinning medication where they want controlled thinning of the blood, reducing that thinning might be deleterious. So there's a caution with drugs like warfarin. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. The doctors will tell you that your warfarin, I mean, it's interesting that obviously all animals, like dogs and cats, the treatment for warfarin poisoning, rat poisoning, is obviously vitamin K.
Yeah. And so what doses are used appreciably in humans? Can you give us any hints and tips there?
There's one study done on MK7, and it's a 3-year study on osteoporosis in menopausal women, and that was using a dose of 180 micrograms. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably a yardstick in relationship to dosage. I think the limitation will be cost. I don't think it's a limitation of concentration.
Yeah.
I think that eventually they'll find that, as I said, anything between 500 micrograms to fully carboxylate everything. Mm-hmm. It's probably on the cards, looking the way research is going.
So, Hub, with regards to the different forms of the vitamin K2, the MK7 versus the MK4, what happens is the chain length is longer in K7 and it basically gets snipped off until it's a shorter length, the MK4. So what are the advantages of MK7 over MK4? Is there any different actions?
Yeah, well, a bit of biochemistry here for a start. K1 gets converted in the liver to menadione. Menadione then goes to the tissues to produce MK4. Mm-hmm. So that's the normal mechanism of vitamin K metabolism. Now, that MK4 is in the tissues which we eat all the time. So you'll find that chicken meat and all the meat you eat has actually MK4. The Japanese use MK4 in a pharmaceutical industry, and they use for osteoporosis in Japanese women, menopausal, after menopause. Mm-hmm. Now, the intake that they're giving is actually a huge amount. It's around about the 45 milligrams. We're talking in Australia of MK7 for menopausal osteoporosis in women, 160 to 200 micrograms.
Yeah.
So MK4 is not very well metabolized. It's not very bioavailable. We're talking about bioavailability again.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's a difference that when you're talking about the metabolism of a structure and then finding it in tissues rather than giving that structure into your mouth and then hoping that it'll get to your tissues.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's a metabolic process. Mm-hmm. K2 and K1, actually, MK7 and K1 have a similar metabolic pathway.
Hub, thank you so much for joining us on the line today. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
This is FX Radio, and I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook.